everybody. Welcome to the Mustard Seed Community Forum on Veterans Affairs. I'd like to introduce Aaron Steele, who's our speaker today. Aaron is a financial planner with 30 years experience. He specializes in retirement planning, wealth management, wealth preservation, estate planning, and fee-based portfolio management. Aaron is currently on the board and chairman for Morningside Inc. He was previously active in Rotary International with West Olympia Rotary and served as the club's Sergeant at Arms and Club Services Director and Chair of the Finance Committee. Aaron is here to talk to us today about planning specifically for veterans in honor of the recent Veterans Day. Welcome, Aaron.
Thanks, Maureen. Appreciate it. Thank you. So, any veterans, spouses of veterans? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your service. I am not a veteran, and so, as Maureen said, I'm a financial planner. So when I got the invitation to come to a Veterans Day event, we deal with a lot of things veterans related, and so I kind of thought, well, maybe I can stick the landing, but in order to stick the landing, I've got to start at that 30,000 foot level or the wide view and kind of zero in on why we're involved in veteran spaces and stuff. One of the components or services that we deal with, so financial planning at the end of the day is to provide helping clients with complicated or unique financial problems. That's really what financial planning is at the end of the day. Investment management is what we do, but investment management is a byproduct of a financial plan. Not all financial plans warrant an investment management decision. So if we lead with the plan can take us any number of different directions. And at the end of the day, it's about protecting assets, making sure that you're protected through the process. VA is not the only government agency, so to say, that we deal with, but the scenario there is that we work with seniors to help provide a solution to their stage of life. So late stage retirement, we often see that people are no longer safe in the home. We're either having to bring care into the home, which costs a lot of money, or we're having to transition away from the home, which costs a lot of money. And so all of these things are very circumstantial or situational. And so then we start interacting with different government agencies. And again, it's not just the VA that we deal with, but for the sake of today's conversation, we're going to zero in on VA specific related things. And we find a lot when we start looking at these agencies. First of all, again, from the very wide view, it's a big bureaucracy. The VA itself is a very big bureaucracy. I answer more questions about just specifically where somebody should be within the VA. Because, so for example, and we had a kind of a little talk about this. We didn't get into detail, but kind of address this here in just a few minutes ago about Veterans Health Administration. So Veterans Health Administration is one component of the VA. That's where I go see a VA doctor. I can get hearing aids from the Veterans Health Administration. I can get prescription drugs from the Veterans Health Administration. And then there's VA pension. So there's kind of these two sides of the wall. VA pension is money in my pocket for one reason or another. VA Veterans Health Administration is I go see a VA doctor for some reason or another. Now, there are programs and benefits through the VHA. Like if I'm substantially service-connected, disabled or something, then I can go into the Veterans Health Administration and I can have an assessment done. Right? We all know what an assessment is. I can have an assessment done by a VA doctor or a social worker, and they can prescribe, for lack of a better word, some home care. And Veterans Health Administration will pay for comfort keepers or visiting angels or somebody to come out to your home and provide care into the home, but it's on a very limited scale. You're talking 15 hours a week type of thing. So usually long-term care is a progression. We see people that progress through it. The first stage of that long-term care is usually that home care component. It doesn't tend to be a long-term solution because It is the most expensive form of care over the long run. That if you're now contracting privately for one-on-one care 24/7, you're talking $30,000, a month for the type of care. So there's some efficiencies that we gain by looking to communities, where I go to a community of some kind now, and now that community will provide care for me. And in doing so, now I've got one caregiver for 5 residents. So you can start to see that we gain some efficiencies right away. And in the world of creating a financial plan around financial uncertainty, you can see why that's important to us. And so we view that home care component often as a temporary, certainly not a long-term solution. Sometimes it works out, sometimes people pass while they're there, sometimes they recover and get better. But from a progression standpoint, we're usually viewing the transition away from the home. And then what does that transition look like? Are both the spouses going to be transitioning away from the home? Or now are we expecting the sale of the home? And a whole bunch of other stuff opens up. Or is one spouse going to transition away from the home and the other spouse is going to be someplace else? That's a different scenario. And so over here in VA pension, there's 2 different types of pensions. And so we just talked about how Veterans Health Administration, there's no money in my pocket from Veterans Health Administration, but they can pay for some subsidized care for care to come into the home to provide that assistance. Over here in VA pension, different wall, completely different. This is money in my pocket. And I can get money in my pocket from the VA for a couple different reasons. Number one, I can get money in my pocket because this is all service related, right? I was our artillery, and I have hearing problems, and so when you hear people talk about a 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%, they're talking about service-connected disability pensions. And that is exactly that. You'll often see somebody who was in artillery who has a 20% or a 30%. It's always in those round 10 numbers as far as what the service-connected disability pension is. And that's all related to your service time. A certain place, a certain time. It used to be that the VA would just prove that you were there, and especially for Agent Orange, this is important to know. So, and this is how the VA has kind of expanded this over the years, but that for service-connected disability related to Agent Orange, which manifests into other things, the connection would be to show that the veteran was in an area that they knew was an exposed area. And that, and for years, that was the limitation, that they were not in an area that was known to be an exposed Agent Orange area. So since then, they've expanded it to include working on people or equipment, because people have been exposed by working on people and equipment coming back from affected areas as well. So there's been an expansion of that, which is all good, but that's all, a certain place, a certain time, we can prove it. Your disability is a result of, we can demonstrate, or you have the symptoms related to, I'm a paratrooper and you faulty parachute, have bad knees or hips or something as a result. Those are all related to service comp disability. So today what we wanted to kind of zero in on is another disability pension through the VA, and that's called non-service comp disability. And the reason why our focus is there is the program really is a long-term care subsidy. It is a benefit to help subsidize the cost of long-term care needs. The other thing, it's very circumstantial. It's very situational. There's a lot of strategy associated with VA aid and attendance or non-service connected disability. And meaning if you're working with somebody, there has to be, you're often creating the set of circumstances that you need in order for this benefit to be awarded. It's unlikely that you're going to walk into a situation and just apply for it and have the right set of circumstances. So it's an advisory capacity. And so the VA or any other government agency does not live in an advisory capacity. They cannot They cannot give advice. So the advice or the engineering of these benefits kind of lives outside of the VA. Now, I'm not a claims agent. We do have our own claims agent. So when we're filing these claims to the VA, we're already putting our strategy into place, that we're creating the circumstances, and we'll talk about what those are. But that's kind of what it looks like, is we spend the time to say, work with the family. They'll call and say, well, under this set of circumstances, there would be no benefit awarded. But if you did this or that, then that set of circumstances, there would be a benefit awarded, but it's going to result in X amount of dollars. Is that X amount of dollars going to be sufficient for what you're looking for? And if it's not, then if it's not enough, then maybe we switch gears and look to a different government program or benefit. So you can see that there's a lot of give and take as far as the conversation that we're looking at goes. Any questions there? No? Okay. So VA aid and attendance, as far as the qualifying conditions, what it needs to look like, and this is kind of where we'll just continue to zoom in on it. You got to be 59 and a half or older. So there is a federal definition called unemployable. If you're less than 59 and a half and you're unemployable, that is a federal definition. You meet the qualifications still. I want to kind of distinguish between these hard lines in the sand where there's nothing negotiable about this qualifying criteria versus these areas of these qualifying criteria that are gray area or more negotiable, where more engineering maybe takes place. And so the two that are not engineerable is you're either 59 and a half or you're not. You're either unemployable federally or you're not. The other non-engineerable portion of this is you're either a wartime veteran or you're not. So you had to serve 90 days of active duty, at least 1 day during a period of conflict. Reserve time does not count. The Bay of Pigs does not count. We get a lot of conversation about, well, Dad went in 58, he came out in 60. Well, he was in the Bay of Pigs. Well, unfortunately, that's not an official period of conflict. There's nothing we can do there. That doesn't mean, and from a planning perspective, that doesn't mean that we're out of options, right? We just eliminate a certain program that we would otherwise be maybe looking to, because we're not even certain at this point. We're just exploring the possibilities. But for our purposes today, then the dates are a little bit different. Even if I had my PowerPoint, I didn't have the dates on there today, but certainly World War II, we don't see very many World War II veterans anymore. Korea was 50 to 55. We're starting not to see many Korea War veterans anymore. Certainly Vietnam, we are seeing the bulk of the conversations are around Vietnam veterans. They tend to have service-connected disabilities in a lot of cases. Where Korea and World War II, those veterans often did not have service-connected disabilities. And remind me to get back to that, because there is a distinction between what happens if somebody has a service-connected and how does that affect their non-service-connected. But and then there's and so Vietnam went from 64 to 77, and I don't know the exact date, but and then there's the Gulf War from 1990 to 2021, 2022. So 90 days of active duty, at least 1 day during an official period of conflict. That's kind of the range that we're looking for. You didn't have to serve in action. You didn't have to see action. Even if, and I get this question a lot from Vietnam veterans now, was, well, Dad never went to Vietnam. Well, it's okay, he didn't have to. As long as he was active during the Vietnam conflict, then that's what we're looking for. And for a surviving spouse, that you are a surviving spouse of a veteran, there are benefits for surviving spouses here as well. There are reduced pension benefits. Meaning if the veteran passes away and now the surviving spouse needs assistance with things, then what does that look like? Again, we have to have the qualifying criteria for the veteran, and then for the spouse, it's just that that she's not remarried, that the spouse is not remarried. And the confusion I see a lot of times is that they were not married when he was active duty, and that's not a thing. So I get a lot of questions around that. Kids call me and say, well, mom and dad were not married when dad was in the service. Well, it doesn't matter. As long as they were married and that she is still unmarried, then she's the surviving spouse of that veteran. If she remarried, then she would be the surviving spouse if the new spouse was a veteran.
Is there any time period that you have to be married for? I know for Social Security it's 10 years.
Right, no.
No.
Yeah. So those are the two kind of red lines. There's nothing we can do about that. We either have those dates, or you're 59 and a half or not. The rest of it's kind of engineerable. And so let me get back to that service connected versus non-service connected. So if somebody is, let's say they're 20% service connected and they're receiving $500 a month, and it's a single veteran, and the max pension benefit he could get under aid and attendance, let's just call it $2,300 a month, but he's already receiving $500 a month for a 20% service connected disability, it means he could get the difference. So he would get the difference between the two of the max pension. The max pension for a single veteran under aid and attendance is going to be that $2,300 a month range. I've got them here in the brochure. I used to know these numbers by heart, but yeah, $2,300. So, meaning if the veteran's already receiving a $500 a month service-connected disability, he's going to pick up, $1,800 a month, the difference between those two. If the veteran is already 100% service-connected disabled, then his max pension under service comp disability is going to be more than that under aid and attendance. So there is no more disability benefit for the veteran under that. And again, that doesn't mean that there aren't other things that we can do. It just means that we eliminate that as a possible benefit that we'd be looking at that point. That makes sense? Okay. So the engineerable portion of this conversation is around, so we have to have a medical needs test. There's a medical needs test, there's an income test, and there's an asset test. So the medical needs test, it's more of a gray area. And I'm sure you guys deal with this, I'm sure you've seen it as well. When you have a conversation with a family that maybe hasn't walked through this door before, they tend to think, and everything is driven by activities of daily living. So, but a family can't necessarily frame what a activity of daily living is. And so when you're talking to the family, they tend to say things like, oh, mom can do it. She can do it on her own. And that might be a pride issue for mom, right? That mom insists on doing it from a pride issue. And the families will say things like, well, mom's not bedridden. She doesn't need the assistance because she's not bedridden. Well, that's not the framework we're trying to meet here. And so the VA, I've never seen them provide a very good definition for activities of daily living. Does everyone know what activities of daily living are? Okay, so we'll kind of touch on it anyway, but the independent activities of daily living are going to be things like meal preparation, light housework. Those things don't count. And so when I get a call from a family saying, mom needs to move out of the house, she leaves the burner on, she needs help with her medications, she needs help with cooking, she doesn't see very well, and she needs help with light housework. Well, if we frame that situation, that's not a payable situation, because now we're talking about independent activities of daily living. When the VA and everything, whether it's your long-term care insurance, state Medicaid, or VA benefits, is going to frame it around what they call activities of daily living. So those are going to be dressing assistance, hygiene assistance, ambulation assistance, toileting assistance, and fork to mouth. So even people in pretty bad condition, we don't find fork to mouth eating or feeding as an assist very often. So if somebody's really bad off, we see that, but usually we're operating within one of those other four. So either a hygiene assist, a dressing assist, ambulation, or toileting. And so one of the ways that the question for ambulation is asked is, does the patient need assistance getting in and out of a bed or a chair? And they go, no, they can do it themselves. They got their cane or their walker. That's an assist. Okay, you're not paying somebody for the assist, but it's still an assist. So we can check a box there. So you're using an ambulation assist. So we're starting to kind of carve out, the framework that we need. And the state Medicaid gives the best framework for what an activity of daily living is. If you hear social workers within the state, DSHS, talk about it, how they frame it out is they say, does the patient have a medical condition, and because of that condition, on their worst day, could they use assistance? That opens up a whole lot of doors. That's a whole lot different than bedridden, which is the framework that the family walked in with, right? Now we're talking about a medical condition on their worst day. Could they use assistance? I mean, that's arthritis. On a cold day like today, might be hard to shave. Hygiene assist, If you're using the walker, there's conceivably there's a fall risk there. Fall risk, dressing assist, hygiene. So you can start to see how you can start kind of carving some stuff out. Now, it's not my job to carve that out. We've helped to kind of coach the family what they're looking for, and then they work with their family doctor to help kind of carve out a situation. Because if we present, with the packet comes a report called a physician's report that gets sent along to the VA. It goes to my claims agent, she facilitates it, she looks at it as well. It's not going to cross either one of our desks if it's not framed out right. So if the family comes in and says, mom's going in for meal preparation and light housework, again, we know that's not a payable situation. So working with the family to make sure, and if it's not truthful, then it's something that we intend to use at some point, right? Remember, financial planning is not a point in time. It's for a stage of life. It's through life. And so we are managing through a stage of life. And this is how we approach this is as I said, there are other programs and benefits that we will weave into at some other point down the road, because at some point this VA aid and attendance benefit may not be enough of a benefit for us. So we are constantly looking at how do we integrate multiple programs throughout the stage of life. And it could be our conversation today is this benefit is not a good benefit for you today, but as soon as we're able to check these boxes, then it's going to be an appropriate benefit then. And so think of it more like backstops. From a planning perspective, we're just creating these backstops along the way. And we're giving financial assurance to the family along the way that, that as we meet these other conditions, that we're going to be able to do that. But so we've got to frame it out the right way. It's got to be, and the language of that document has to be pretty precise too. So in other words, if we fill out a document that says, well, dad's got dementia and he doesn't need assistance with dressing or hygiene, or they say that he needs observation or standby assist, well, that's some pretty weak language, right? I mean, what side of the land, are we saying he needs the assistance, or are we saying he doesn't need the assistance? So how do we frame that? So the way that we look at that is to say, okay, well, there's a dementia. Dementia is a payable condition, but again, it's still framed around the ADLs. So around those activities of daily living. So one way we may look at that is, okay, well, dad's got dementia. He's physically capable, but not mentally capable. In other words, he may come to breakfast wearing a swimsuit, or he may not have any hygiene going on. And so we just stand by it. We say, does dad need assistance with hygiene? Yes. Why? Dementia. Does dad need assistance with dressing? Yes. Why? Dementia. You don't really need to get any more wordy than that. And if you do, then you could wind up finding yourself in a situation where somebody's picking apart your language in order to find a reason not to approve your claim. It's between you and your doctor. And if you and the doctor framed it that way, then that's what I'm looking for as we're going through those.
So this is the doctor outside of the VA?
Yes. It does. This is another misconception. It does not have to be a VA doctor.
But some doctors might be better at framing than others.
My experience is that very few doctors speak ADL. I'm sure there are some out there, but
so how do you get the right framing?
You're there with the doctor, because what happens, this happens all the time, is mom or dad will go in, they'll sit down with the doctor. Here, can you fill this out? The doctor will read it. Doctor will say, okay, well, Bill, do you need any help with dressing? No, I can do it myself. Do you need any help with taking a shower or hygiene or bathing and showering? Nope, I can do it myself. Okay, and so we get a physician's report that now reflects that. We don't have a leg to stand on to actually file a claim about anything.
So if we get the doctor to do that, then the claim is brought to you?
To scrub, we scrub it, and then I scrub it. Once I have a completed claim, then I get it to my claims agent, and then she's then facilitating it to the VA. So we call it coaching. Is there somebody in the doctor's office with mom or dad to help coach the doctor? And we don't want the untruth, we want the truth. But I've heard stories where mom walks into the doctor's office, she sets her walker outside the doctor's office, she then walks into the doctor's office, jumps up onto the exam table. She's great, she needs no help with anything, walks back out and says, oh, I'm so exhausted, grabs her walker, and then right back to it, So we're under our, we have our best face on when we see the doctor, right? So we just want to, again, work within that framework that I think DSHS does a great job of explaining. Does the patient have a medical condition, and because of that condition, on their worst day, could they use some assistance? And so we want to work within that. If we don't have it yet, that's fine. We can still move ahead with our housing situation, knowing that we have confidence in financial backstops that we've built along the way, even if this is not a program that we're going to use today necessarily. And then the other two are financial components. So one of the components is income test. How much do you make? And so again, if I'm sitting at home and I make $3,000 a month and I'm spending $3,000 a month and I bring in a $500 a month caregiver, well, that might seem like a financial hardship, right? But the way the VA looks at it, they don't recognize any of the other non-medical expenses. So the VA only recognizes your medical expenses in relation to your income. So if you've got rent or mortgage or car insurance, or these are all living expenses. And the VA does not offset your income with living expenses. They will, however, offset your income with required medical costs. So if I make $3,000 a month and I'm spending $3,000 a month and I'm bringing in a $500, $1,000 a month caregiver, the way the VA sees it is you make $3,000 a month and your required medical costs are $1,000 a month, you have excess $2,000 a month, there's no benefit here for you. So, but circumstantially that changes. Now if I'm in an assisted living or I'm in an independent room of an assisted living building, VA has a definition for this, it's called protected environment. But now we can start to use the cost of living there as a reduction of our income. So I make $5,000 a month. I clearly make too much money for the VA to award me any type of benefits, but my cost to live at this assisted living is now $6,000 a month. Living at that assisted living, I get transportation provided to me, I get utilities, I get food, I get my cable, I get everything taken care of where at home, none of these expenses were considered to be required medical costs, but now in the assisted living environment, because it's a protected environment, I live there for safety reasons because I'm unable to live on my own for safety reasons. Now that $6,000 a month offsets my income. So now when the VA looks at me financially, they say, how much do you make? You make $5,000 a month. What are your required medical costs? $6,000 a month. Now I'm in the hole $1,000 a month, and the VA says, well, you can't afford that, so we need to subsidize your income for that. So again, it's very circumstantial. It's very situational. So you can start to see how we have to create circumstances to where that benefit. And especially early on, as families are maybe starting to have these conversations about what's going to happen next, it's useful for us to have these conversations because, believe it or not, this does not work in a independent living facility anymore. It used to, but the VA in 2018 changed their definition of what a protected environment was. It's not, we don't need to get into that today, but it just means that if I'm living at an independent living facility, I'm not going to bring names, I'm not going to name names of independent living facilities, as opposed to in an independent room of an assisted living facility or in an assisted living facility. Now, because of the definition, then the cost to live there, my care plus my room and board are now considered to be required medical costs in most cases, or at least they will be at some point when we're able to check those additional boxes. Adult family home works in that scenario as well. And then the last component is how much do you have? So there's an asset test. And again, in 2018, the VA was very unclear about, they didn't have what was called a bright line, what they consider to be liquid assets. And so in 2018, one of the things that they did is they changed it. And so they mirrored Medicaid rules, some of them, so now they have a bright line. They can say that you can have $150,000 of liquid assets. So, and the VA also says that your home is an exempt asset. So what I find, though, the proceeds from the sale of your home are not exempt. And so this is where this gets tricky, because if mom and dad have $120,000 in a $500,000 home, they apply for this benefit with no guidance. They then are awarded this benefit. They love their assisted living environment. They decide, tell the kids, let's sell the home. Now we get $500,000 from the sale of the home. Now we don't pencil, because now I got $500,000 from the sale of my home. I look different financially now. VA is going to catch up to that. They're going to say, congratulations on the sale of your home. Your home is an exempt asset, but the proceeds from the sale of your home is not exempt. Or the rental property that the house is now is not exempt. So you owe us back all the money that we've paid you back to the date of the sale of your house. But the VA has built in an exemption, something that you can do. And this is what's interesting, working with all of these government programs and benefits. Again, VA is not the only one we do this with. They all build in these strategies. Strategies of things that you can do to protect yourself financially. You just have to follow the rules. But again, the agencies cannot advise you on what those rules are. So the VA built in a very nice strategy here. And the language that the VA uses around it is, they don't say home, they say exempt asset. And they say the home is an exempt asset, and the VA is not going to penalize you for transferring or moving an exempt asset out of your name before the benefit is awarded. So what does that mean?
So you can give it to your kids.
Well, so there's a lot of tax implications on giving it to the kids. So we may use estates. So we may create an estate that's now going to be the holding thing of that. It could be the kids, but if I give my kids the home, then there's tax implications to my kids on doing that. Whereas if they inherit the home, or if they inherit the home through the estate that we create, we avoid some of those.
So an estate would be similar to a trust in that case?
Yeah, yeah. So just an entity that's created for the purpose of owning owning that asset. And so now, and this is different than Medicaid, so that the Medicaid does look at that as establishing the look-back period. So, and again, there are other things from a Medicaid standpoint that we can do to protect assets without getting through look-back periods. But specifically for VA, then, so let's take the scenario where mom and dad, let's say, have $200,000 of liquid assets and a home of $500,000. And the home's paid for, and they're moving into an assisted living. Maybe one of them meets the ADL right now, maybe one of them doesn't. And they're making this transition. And so right now we've got this $500,000 home, and we also have $200,000 of liquid assets, right? So we've got too much money anyway. So from a planning perspective, what we'll do is we'll say we want to prioritize. Our whole conversation is what assets are we going to prioritize around? And so we're going to prioritize leaning on that $200,000 of liquid assets first. So our intention is to spend that down to the $150,000 or below, and then preserve, safe harbor the home in a trust of some kind there. And so we'll quit claim the home to a trust. Maybe the home now becomes an exempt asset. The home is an exempt asset, but we maintain our eligibility there. This is all broadly speaking. This does not meet everyone's criteria, but just an example of how we look at that. Then now when the home sells, now the proceeds from the sale of the home are that of the trust now. It's not mom and dad's, it's not in their pockets. And then, so for the VA perspective now, we've got $200,000 that we've got to deal with before we meet financial eligibility. And we may still be working around some ADL activity as well for mom and dad there as well. So we're going to target that $200,000. If there is a gap in income, again, we make $5,000 a month jointly. We need $8,000 or $9,000 a month, and that $4,000 a month gap is going to be filled with that from that $200,000 until we get down below the $150,000. While we're intending to protect this $500,000 over here, and we intend to protect it for them. So and you'd be surprised. I thought this would be a lot of times about the kids and their legacies. Most of the time, it's not. I can tell you more times than not, it's really important for mom and dad to protect assets as a legacy to the kids. Either way, our approach is we're protecting assets for mom and dad. There's a statistic out there that says, I think it's 67% of seniors fear running out of money more than they fear death, So again, with a little bit of understanding what the rules are, following the rules, putting in some strategies here, you can start to see that it's pretty easy to kind of create a scenario where maybe there was financial stress. And we're just talking about using one agency out of that. It even gets bigger as we start to expand how the other agencies work in relation to that plan itself. So that's really all I got today. I think we covered the basic of the qualifying criteria, why it fits into a broader overall financial plan. So any questions?
Would you say that for a veteran that the VA is always your first approach?
No. So it depends on the scenario. So if mom and dad are going to be separated, mom's going to be at home independent and dad's going to go to an adult family home or something, then other agencies allow us to do other things to separate assets much easier so that we can financially protect mom through this process. Those strategies are really pretty extraordinary. Where VA, every time you're dealing with the VA, this is important to know too. We see people that come together later in life, where they might have come together in their 70s, both widow and widowers, and they come to this relationship in their 70s. For all intents and purposes, they have separate estates, right? Yeah, and they've never commingled their money. They've always just shared life together. VA doesn't care. It does not matter. What's in a marital estate, it is their money, is the way the VA sees it. The state doesn't. And so with the state, we can force, or we can protect assets by moving assets inside of the marital estate to the so-called healthy spouse, from one spouse to the other. We can impoverish one spouse, and we can financially protect the so-called healthy spouse. VA, if it's in the marital estate, it's in the marital estate. It doesn't matter if mom's in Colorado living with the kids and they haven't even been together for 5 years. The VA is going to view it as joint assets. Another important part of when we're looking at, so that's why we have to understand the circumstances. I often talk about what's down the road. So we're often talking about projecting or looking at the reality of what's down the road. If mom and dad are both, at first dad's going to move to the assisted living and then mom's going to follow sometime later, that's a good situation for us to maybe not use aid and attendance today, but we're going to start stacking the deck in that direction, looking to use aid and attendance for that. If mom's completely independent, then aid and attendance is probably not going to be the benefit we're looking at. Again, if we're looking at the intention of protecting her financially or him financially through the process, the tools that we have to do that are just better someplace else. If they're both going someplace, then aid and attendance is probably going to be a good tool. Aid and attendance is not going to be a good tool if the non-veteran spouse needs all the assistance and the veteran spouse is healthy. It's mathematically very difficult to get to a benefit in that situation. So the VA will tell you, yeah, there's a $1,600 a month benefit there for the ill spouse of a healthy veteran, but it's mathematically driven and it's very mathematically difficult to get that benefit to work. So I use the word circumstantial and situational all the time. I think that's the best way to kind of work these things through. It takes us 5 minutes. I've got pre-planning worksheets that I send to a family. They fill it out, send it back to me. It's just kind of a rough sketch of what's going on financially. What are we projecting these long-term care costs to be? Then we have a 5-minute conversation with the family. That situation is not going to work well. Or that situation is going to work well. I can tell you, I talk to a lot of placement agents and placement agencies because they want to get it right. They want a housing solution that's going to be long-term for mom and dad. So I always say the financial plan has to live right alongside the housing plan. If we create a housing plan that's not going to result in any benefits, that means we're just moving again. In order to capture these benefits, we're going to have to change the circumstances. So it's always best for us to have that 5-minute conversation, the what if, in terms of will this scenario work? Yes, it will. We can pick up the pieces later, but now you can move on with your housing plan. Well, thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Aaron.
Huh?
I really appreciate you coming. And,
Yeah, thank you.
Telling us
Nice
more
being
about
here.
it.
Nice being here. It was a pleasure meeting you all. So, thanks.
So how long have you been doing this?
Financial services, 30 years, and then 10 years specifically within this niche.